Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
My apologies to Sam and Toby and John and Janet and Anne and Mike and two Tobys, one in Croydon, one in Cape Town. Oh, amazing. We will return to that story, especially now that we've lifted the bonnet and are a little bit frightened of what we've found underneath. Next time you hear them talking about whether or not the NHS is, quote, on the table, and next time you notice that Donald Trump simultaneously claims it is and it isn't, and we let him get away with it, just remember, look at the mess we've made by not asking people to explain what they mean by control our money, our borders and our laws. And ask yourself whether it looks like we're about to dive headlong into a similarly avoidable and catastrophic mistake by not asking what is meant by the phrase, the NHS is on the table. But I think I'll take George's observation, slightly embellished by my own contribution, but how many articles and books do they have to write calling for the privatisation of the NHS, or how much money do they have to take from wealthy men and women who have expressed a desire to see the NHS privatised before you think maybe they actually want the NHS to be privatised, despite the denials for which they're not paid? Just a thought, putting it out there. It's 11:35. There's a wonderful photograph in the newspapers today, and it is. I make no apologies for liking it so much. There's a plaintiveness to the face of the teacher photographed. He has spotted the camera. He's giving it a kind of, well, plaintive is the only word I can think of actually. Stare as the owner of a local fast food takeaway rails at him on a zebra crossing. The headline, irresistibly, is "The Junk Food Police." Fast food shopkeepers have gone to war with a school they accuse of destroying their trade. Now, in a two-dimensional universe, this is a very simple invitation to pick a side. Do you pick the side of people flogging stuff to kids that will make them fat and die earlier, or do you pick the side of people trying to stop people flogging stuff to kids that will make them fat and die earlier? If you're old and a bit slow on the uptake, you'll draw parallels with your life 30 or 40 years ago, despite not recognising that the world is a completely different place. It's very hard to resist that. I used to be guilty of it myself, particularly with drugs, actually. I used to really pat myself on the back for being a phone-in host who spoke of drug-related issues with at least a modicum of knowledge and understanding. But then we did one about 18 months ago, and I realised my knowledge and understanding of drug-related issues was based upon experiences that ended in approximately 2001. Not even 2001. 1990, I mean, university. God, I'm old. So I have adjusted my position and recognised that many people have more pertinent perspectives than mine. So Kidderminster in the 1970s and the relationship between the local fish and chip shop and how often we played in the park or went outside to play football until it was too dark to even see our shoelaces is probably not the most pertinent qualification for a comment upon junk food, schools and childhood obesity in 2019. I'll say that again, because it still eludes a significant number of people. My experiences in the 1970s have absolutely no relevance whatsoever to conversations about childhood obesity, exercise and junk food in 2019. Do you know what? While we're here, your experiences about buying a house in the 1950s have absolutely nothing to do with the experiences of people trying to buy houses today. I'll go a little bit further. Your experiences regarding gender, vegetarianism, or just about anything under the sun in 1957 are not very relevant to conversations about all of these issues unfolding in 2019. But I am, of course, wasting my breath. Except for people who like to think. And if you do like to think, then have a little think about this. One of the traders, I think Nick spoke to him earlier, called in police after teachers effectively punished children for going into his premises. The argument is that they don't want their children, their charges, their pupils, to eat junk food on anything like the scale they are currently consuming it. This owner said he'd seen a massive drop in fast food sales since teachers from Cottam School started their patrols, threatening teachers, reportedly threatening them, or indeed giving them detentions if they were found in the shops. Now, the most obvious question to ask here is whether this is happening in school time or whether it is happening outside school time, to which the answer seems to be it happens between 2:45 and 3:15. And according to the school, it happens to ensure the safety of children on their way home from school. So my initial lazy knee-jerk reaction to this would be, well, if they're on their way home from school, is it actually the school's job to police this? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. That's actually quite an interesting question. Would I want my children to be dissuaded with threat of detention from going into fast food shops after school? Answer, yes, actually. You can't be there 24/7. But, again, bubble, admission time, full disclosure, we're quite middle class. So we are very conscious of our children's diet. And I appreciate this isn't an exclusively middle-class position to adopt, but I have been persuaded over the years that the allure of a £2 packet of chicken and chips is different for people who, well, actually, am I about to patronise you? Because I'm £2 for chicken and chips, I personally would run a mile from now for my kids. If I've just fallen out of the pub, then I would be hoovering up like it was going out of fashion. But generally, a sober free choice now, I won't eat 90% of the stuff that I would have eaten 20 years ago. But I think it's really patronising, because I was about to say it's not really about the fact that I've got a few quid. So £2 on chicken and chips, I'd rather go to Nando's. Do you see what I mean? And have something presumably healthier, albeit similar. I was about to talk about education and information. So the reason why I would want a teacher policing the local fast food joint, the local chicken shop outside my daughter's school, is to stop my daughter going in to do something that she wouldn't be able to do if she was with me. And that is kind of what in loco parentis means, isn't it? The Latin phrase. It's often used to describe educators, in the place of parents, in loco parentis. And then I know exactly what you're thinking of. Well, maybe you're not, but you will in a minute, because I'm going to remind you. The mums, when Jamie Oliver started his mission to look after children whose parents didn't know enough to look after them properly themselves, and we saw the mums queuing at the chain link fence at the school where Jamie had introduced much, much healthier meals, and we saw the mums pushing junk food through the holes in the fence for their mewling infants, because they hadn't yet learnt to like food that wasn't dripping with salt and saturated fats and various other quasi-poisonous delights. I think, and there will have been people listening to the programmes I made back then, I think I was probably quite snobbish about those mums. I'm not anymore, not snobbish. I'm sympathetic, and that's where the danger of being patronising presents itself, because they did what they did simply through ignorance. Nobody would feed their children daily stuff that they categorically understood to be shortening their child's life, would they? Free market, it's not a free market, mate, if you're spending billions of pounds on advertising it and diddly squat on combating it. So, what do you reckon? I have children. I've got 2 kids. One of whom wouldn't need to be dissuaded from going into a fast food shop. One of them probably would. And although there probably aren't many options for vegetarians in most of them, a big fat bucket of chips on the way home would go down a treat. But if your children play rugby or do a lot of PE, do a lot of sport, again, there's a middle-class element to that observation, I'm afraid, because schools that do a lot of exercise, particularly in England, tend to be in the more middle-class areas, or even in the private sector. Wales and Scotland, again, seem to swim in a slightly different direction on these issues for reasons that I don't fully understand. But, again, if your kids are doing loads and loads of exercise, it doesn't matter what they eat. I've got a friend whose son is a rower, and she is contemplating bankruptcy simply as a result of having to feed him. He's only 14. eats her out of house and home. You remember what it was like when you came home and opened the fridge after you'd been in the park for 3 hours playing football or running around or just playing silly beggars. Yeah, what have we got to eat, Mum? What's to eat, Mum? And you'd sort of get through half a ham or so, half a packet of ham or, you know, a lump of cheddar cheese or something like that. 8 slices of Mother's Pride, all slathered with butter. So the world changes. And it has changed into a place where this school has decided that in order to safeguard the health of their children, they need to dissuade them from going into junk food joints every day after school. And I am cautiously approving of this on the grounds that the alternative is to say, yeah, I think that they should turn a blind eye while kids shorten their own lives, increase the likelihood of becoming obese, and open the door to a whole host of health problems later in life. And if you want to be all right-wing and selfish about it, whose taxes do you think is going to pay for their diabetes drugs 20 years down the line? It's coming up to 11:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The phone lines are open, 0345 6060 973. With the greatest of love and respect, don't ring me to tell me what you did in the 1970s, because it's about as relevant to what we're discussing today as your house buying experiences in the 1950s are to the current relationship between income, deposit, mortgage and house price. You're welcome. Thanks to the people over at Pod Bible who've just nominated Full Disclosure for the Best Interview podcast. You know, people always say I love the competition. I mean, such great competition. It's an honour just to be nominated. Actually, this one is. Looking at the other people on it, Adam Buxton, Richard Herring, Elizabeth Day, who does the one with Dolly Alderton and Polly Sykes? Is it Pandora Sykes? Scroobius Pip, my main man, and Kate Thornton's one. And I mean, they're all brilliant, actually, arguably better than mine. But I'd still really like to win. So, although it is not a insincere platitude when I tell you that the competition is honour enough, being nominated in that company is honour enough, I'm the only one with a massive radio show. So theoretically, if you all go and vote for me, we should be over the line, and then we can split the winnings. All right, we can all keep the trophy for a day or two. 11. Also, it would mean an awful lot to Ava, who's been my producer now for at least 10 minutes. And if we could just get that one over the line, it would be a proper mark and recognition of the amazing efforts that she's put into making both the programme and the podcast as successful as they currently are. Right, that's enough. Let's get back to fast food and teachers punishing children for going into junk food joints. I'm told that legally there is a duty of care for children who are on their way home from school. 400 kids come out of school and head in a direction that takes them past fast food joints. Teachers have now been put on duty in rather fetching high-visibility vests, threatening them with detentions if they go in. By way of context, the United Nations warned in October that takeaways are turning deprived parts of Britain into food swamps, where children actively struggle to find any healthy option. You see what I mean? People who talk about a free market, how is it a free market if you don't have a healthy choice? It's not a free market, you lying charlatans. I'd take you on by name, but I've got no idea who you are, because the people who do your work for you won't reveal who funds them. UNICEF said that the poorest areas in the United Kingdom have 5 times more fast food shops than the most affluent neighbourhoods. So is it a job for the teachers? Ed is in Huddersfield. Ed, what would you like to say?
I'm just a bit confused, really, at the logistics of trying to get teachers to manage fast food restaurants, essentially. I mean, they've got so many other things they're doing already. There's so many examples of them trying...
Your confusion notwithstanding, it's currently working and happening.
Yeah, but not across the board, and I can't imagine that many schools are going to have the resources to continue doing that.
No, and if I mean, with love and respect, if I'd been asking questions about that, then that would be an interesting contribution. But I'm looking more at the moral value or the rights and the wrongs of this scheme, which is working and is happening.
So, but where would it end? You know, if we...
I don't know,
I'm
mate.
happy in principle to manage that kind of thing. You know, I think we're right to kind of address the fact that people are going into fast foods.
But why would you ask where it ends when we're talking about where it is?
Well, because this is just another example of teachers having to do additional roles on top of the stuff that, you know, they're on their knees already, and then to start throwing things in like this as well just seems a little bit like passing the buck.
Yes. So who should be carrying the buck?
Well, surely it's a parental responsibility.
Parents aren't there, are they?
No, but neither are teachers.
Well, except they are. He's in a high-visibility vest and he's been photographed in every national newspaper, which is why we're talking about something that is happening, not something where will it end. So here it is, happening, being done. What do you think about it?
I think it's not the right thing to do in terms of pooling the right resources with schools, because they've got other things they need to be concerning themselves with.
But the school have made the decision themselves. They have prioritised it.
I think they should reprioritise.
What do you think is more important than children's life expectancy?
You can't phrase it like that, Dave.
I can. Go on.
What do I think is more important than children's life expectancy?
All right, health then. I'll help you out a bit, because you clearly haven't got an answer to the first question. What's more important than a child's health?
Look, a child's education is the teacher's job. If you're going to talk about a child's health, why isn't it the doctor's job?
Why do they do PE then?
Well, that's part of their culture. That's part of the curriculum.
But why do they do it?
To stay healthy.
Oh, yeah, there you go. 11:52 is the time. Ali is in Cardiff. Ali, what do you reckon?
Hi, mate. Punishing has never really worked as a form of changing behaviour. I mean, if you think back to when toothpaste was invented, the way they got everyone to start brushing their teeth was they stuck suds in there and told them, lick the front of your teeth, you can feel...
Oh, listen, I thought this was going to be an easy one. I've been like a bear with a sore head with the last fella, and I'm about to start swinging at you as well. Detention works. If you you go through that door, you get a detention. Most kids won't go through that door. I was the idiot that would. I don't know why, and luckily I've reached a place in my life now where I no longer look back proudly on what a prat I was as a child. I look back a little bit embarrassedly. But most kids, when me and my mates were getting beaten, that was a deterrent to all the other kids who then didn't do the stuff that we did. So it does work, I'm afraid, punishment.
Detention works as a punishment for... incidents like that. What I'm getting at is you want to change the behaviour of a child in their eating habits long term. So while, yes, you say, right, you're going in there, you're getting detention, it's fine, does it influence the child's eating habits afterwards?
Now that's clever. I mean? Now you're being clever. Right.
So what I would suggest, I mean, I'm plucking an idea out of the sky, is if the chippy offered... still serve the children, but say, right, instead of the £2 for small chips, you get a kid-sized chips for £2. Is the child eventually, in the same way as you look at plastic bag costs, going to say, actually, no, I'm not paying the same price for a smaller portion than everyone else, and maybe over time adjust and look elsewhere? Because
do you not remember hanging around outside the off licence? Or actually, let me rephrase that. Do you not remember as a responsible adult making your way into the off licence and some snotty-nosed little kid will ask you to buy him 10 Benson and Hedges and a bottle of Thunderbird?
But this is where, society has a responsibility.
Get us some chips, mate. Buy some chips. Hey, mate, get us a Savoy and chips, will you? You won't let me in. Get us an adult portion, will you?
Look, it's the same with smoking. It's the same with everything else. Some people you're just not going to, it's not going to change. But if I get back to, I know I started off with toothpaste of all things.
Yes.
But if you're nudging into a different behaviour, so when, I think it was in Holland, they stuck those bullseyes, didn't they, or those bees on the urinals and got you to not... all over the floor.
Yes.
If you can
Did that work?
I think so.
Because we came up with an idea years ago, and then I saw it a few years later in a supermarket aisle. I don't know if it ever caught on, but I said, what you need to do is make cleaning products look like guns. If you made if you made like bathroom cleaners look like little guns, then men would clean the bathroom a lot. And I don't know if it ever caught on, but that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. These are all nudge techniques that maybe, rather than looking at the easy option, I'm sorry, but it is an easy option to say, right, you're banned from going in there, is to say, well, kids are young enough that they can learn new habits and better habits. How do you kind of coerce? Now, I appreciate that if there's no healthy joints along that street and it's all fast food joints, yes, you've got an issue. But again, if every... And again, this is a grandiose plan. If every fast food restaurant served a kid's portion, a tiny portion, for the same price as a regular, it might have...
I wonder if they'd be allowed to legally, though.
Well, yeah, by law. I mean, look, legally, can you... Were we all up in arms when you started charging us 10p for plastic bags? But you know what? We all kind of accepted it, and we're conscious about it now.
Yeah. Do you know, conversations like this, I always remember, and I've got a horrible feeling I might have not imagined it, but it might not have happened on my programme. It might have happened somewhere else, but I've co-opted it for the legacy of the programme. When those adverts went up about the smoking ban, and it showed people's arteries being full of fat, and I know they got complaints from people saying, I want to complain about that advert. It's really putting me off smoking.
Yeah, but these are nudge techniques that don't create a huge change to our lives. In the same way that some of the environmental impact, when they say cut flying, well, no, you kind of want to do these little changes that have a long-term domino effect.
Yes. I mean, easily, to bring it back to parental responsibility, which is a bit of a lazy term, but if the kids had no money in their pockets, then they wouldn't be able to eat this food. But, of course, if they had no money in their pockets, then they wouldn't be able to eat the healthy food either. That's the problem. I mean, I don't find it controversial until you start coming out with lines like, where does it end, or back in my day.
I don't agree with that. Look, I think kids are not... It's not well educated enough on the dangers of food, so I don't think.
Kids don't care, mate. You could sit them down for 6 months and tell them not. Think about adults and booze. We know stuff's bad for us. We still do it. The whole point of a teacher is to somehow prevent children from harming themselves, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's like the school curriculum. A lot of the important life skills are not taught young enough, so that good habits are not formed young enough. And we know as we get older, it gets harder to form a good habit and change habits. But these kids, I mean, if you're talking children, the early pre-teens, they're young enough that they will learn. And if you change these little things and introduce, a meat-free Monday, all that kind of stuff, it has a better chance.
And also, I think we're too short-termist, aren't we? In the idea that we'd expect a result tomorrow. And so I think of Jamie Oliver's attempts, which were largely successful, but that shadow of the mums pushing the junk food through the fence, it doesn't mean it wouldn't work. It just means that for those individuals at that point in the process, it wasn't working. So stick with it. Michael Holt, who you will know from his from the world of snooker, says the fast food shops is the market working. It's supply and demand, writes the hitman. If kids wanted steamed broccoli shops would be open. Come on, Michael. If it was that simple, honestly, we'd all be experts. Banning doesn't stop people wanting things. The best thing to do is educate parents and children so they choose healthier options. The last bit's true, but the problem, as the United Nations pointed out, is that there are no healthier options. And if you live in the poorest areas of this country, there are 5 times more fast food shops than there are in the more affluent neighbourhoods. I pointed this out in this little thing I wrote a couple of years ago. You may have heard of it. And I said, how can a woman pushing her baby home from a bus stop who goes past 10 chicken shops, how can she process the fact that that's a really bad thing to be eating every single day? She hasn't gone past a single greengrocer's. It's almost like the mental messages she receives say, chicken. Where I just read this again, this story that we're discussing, and it's a little bit more complicated than the first coverage allowed, actually. The school don't accept, as far as I can make out, and sometimes these stories are written very, very carefully to keep the kind of provocation alive, despite the facts not necessarily being as provocative as they have been presented. The school's argument is a security one, as far as I can tell. We supervise the parade of shops there and all the way from the school to the bottom of Nine Tree Hill. You need to be familiar with the geography of Bristol, I suppose, to follow that. It isn't just these shops. It is only for half an hour, from 2:45 to 3:15, and it is done to ensure the safety of children on their way home from school, which has somehow ended up under the headline, the Junk Food Police. But when I say somehow, I'm being a tad disingenuous. The traders concerned, the owners of outlets such as Chili Bellies. Chili Bellies? Isn't it supposed to rhyme? It'd be Chili Billies, wouldn't it? Or no? Or I don't know what would rhyme with bellies. But anyway, Chili Bellies and Monica's, a convenience store, and Tuck News, they insist that the children are being prevented from going into the shops. Do you know, at Poundland near me, there's a bloke on the door at this time of day, but he's on the door. Oh, man, this is a really good topic, and I'm going to do that thing where I actually start suggesting that it isn't, because the facts have been misrepresented by other members of the media. Oh, why do you always have to do that, James? Seriously, you could have just coasted home now until 1 o'clock with a really cool phone, and you've already had a couple of scraps with people. You've brought life expectancy into a conversation about fried chicken. No one was expecting that. And now you're about to undermine the entire conversation and have to leave yourself finding something else to talk about. But anyway, the Poundland near me. Have I told you the funny story about the Poundland near me? I live in quite a leafy suburb, a smallish, leafy suburb of London. It's in the London borough of Hounslow, so it's not genteel when it comes to council tax and things like that and bin collections. Far from it. But our bit of Hounslow is very genteel, and the local school kids, the naughty school kids, used to congregate when I first moved there outside McDonald's. I would occasionally bob in for a cheeky cheeseburger on the way home. And then it was announced that McDonald's was closing in Chiswick. And a certain type of mum at the school gate was absolutely delighted about this. Absolutely delighted. And they all started speculating about what we might get there instead. I hope we get a Wagamama. I don't know why I'm doing a funny voice. I probably said that last bit myself. They're closing McDonald's. I hope we get a Wagamama. I do like a Wagamama. Chiswick really needs or a Yo Sushi. That would be great. Oddly, no one was in the market for a Harvester. But guess what they put there instead? McDonald's shut. Middle-class mums have a little party. Then they find out when I was first told what was replacing McDonald's, I thought it was a joke. And I laughed. But it wasn't. They replaced the McDonald's with Poundland. And the same kids now obviously congregate outside Poundland in order to go in and, well, you can work it out yourself, spend £1 on a lot of sweets. You get a lot for £1 in Poundland. I appreciate most people listening to this programme probably know that, and the people who don't already know that are unlikely ever to cross the threshold of a Poundland, but I'm here to tell you it's your loss. Seriously, the stuff... Anyway, this programme is sponsored by... No, I'm only joking. So... They now congregate outside Poundland, and I'm not there that often at the relevant time of day because I clock off here and I've got bits and bobs to do. My award-winning and now, of course, multi-award nominated podcast, Full Disclosure, doesn't make itself. There's a lot to do around the place. I've got another book to write, all of this malarkey. Bottom line, I only noticed relatively recently that they have a security guard on the door at roughly the same time. It's not 2:45 to 3:15, it's about 3:45 to 4:15, because the schools close at a different time. The bus stops, you've got one of those little collections of bus stops outside that little bit of the high street. And they've got a 3 kids at a time rule or 4 kids at a time rule. So you have a security guard on the door stopping kids from going into the shop, right? But not because they're concerned about the kids eating too much sugar. It's a security guard concerned presumably about shoplifting and other antisocial issues that can happen when you've got 50 kids piling in, mob-handed, to a relatively confined space of shop. Reading the comment from the school, it is to ensure the safety of children on their way home from school. I don't know that this is the junk food police. And I don't know at 8 minutes after 12 on a wet Wednesday afternoon whether or not I've got the, what's the word I want? Front to now conduct a conversation based upon the presumption that it is when the facts suggest that it probably isn't. Are you still with me at the back? And I never got around to telling you yesterday's story about Copydex, Beards and King Lear, did I? Because that was the other school children's story that we were supposed to talk about that we didn't have time for, which was the school that has lifted a ban on beards after it was suggested that beards upset younger children. Oh, I know what you're thinking. It's supposed to be a phone-in show, James. You raise a very good point. Rachel is in Norwood. Rachel, can you remember why you rang in?
You were wittering on there.
You're telling me. I do apologise.
Wow. Wow. I managed to go to the toilet.
Made a sandwich, changed a wheel on the car.
I had my lunches on the go.
I love it.
Oh, done. Thanks for that. Great.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Fill your boots.
Yeah, so I was speaking to, one of your people there.
Yes.
And so my middle son is 10 and he's going to be going into secondary school and he doesn't eat meat. My oldest one hadn't eaten meat until he was about 8, 9, and he's around the same age where we're talking about meat now. He eats just fish. So my concern, I've had this conversation with him. I've said to him, well, okay, even if you try meat, the problem is, since my eldest was that age, where we live in South London, it is, it's every other shop is pretty much a fast food place. There are grocers, by the way, so that was a little bit extreme with the buggy, because there's always grocers because, just the sense of the community. But you know, a lot of I do have...
And kids aren't going to go and buy raw fruit and vegetables, are they?
No, they're not.
Yeah,
no,
if it's an exceptional
it's
child.
For the locals, right?
Of course, no, you're right.
But there are schools, quite a few schools already around where we are that do the high-vis walk out, make sure the children are kind of getting home.
Move along kind of thing, rather than congregations of big groups. Because even if the kids are the sweetest little cherubs on the planet, 30 of them in a big, loud, noisy group is quite intimidating for other members of the public.
Yeah, and there's a good few secondary schools close by, and they don't want any ruckus with different schools and things like
enough.
that. So I think, but if they were to extend themselves to... I mean, it will take resources because there's so many of these shops. And children do get smarter. This is the thing. They'll just say, OK, well, I'll just go out of the area or I'll just go this end. Or by the time the teachers, you know, they'll work it out. They're very smart. They'll work it out in that sense where, OK, if I went down to that end, you know, jumped on the bus and we went that end, then there'll be different ends and then there'll be that dynamic, that clash between ends and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there is some of that. But personally, I would enjoy that very much because that is one of my concerns. It's not so much my son wants to eat chicken, it's the culture of eating chicken. Yeah, and
what do you mean by that?
Socialisation. Well, it's socialisation.
Well, let me read you this from my friends over at THTC Clothing in Brentford. They say something to note, James. Given an average box is £1.50, the chicken shop often serves as an important social meeting point for communities, like pubs, but cheaper. The free market has taken that human need and turned it into a health risk for profit.
Yeah. Perfect. I mean, it's very much it's very much socialised, you know, a place to socialise.
Like a barber's.
And eat something cheap while you're there.
Yeah, OK, I get that.
So I would prefer, of course, I would prefer my son just to come straight home and not divert to one of these fast food outlets. But socially, that could be an issue. So
all his mates will be going there, and although he won't be buying chicken, he'll buy himself a bucket of chips. And again, I keep coming back to this, and I don't think it's a class-based point necessarily. It might be socio-economic. If he was doing 2 hours of PE today, every day, he could eat whatever he wanted. He could eat a deep-fried horse on the way home every day and still be all right. But they're not doing anything like the exercise that they're used to, and that's part of the problem as well.
To be fair, this one, he is very, very sporty, and he's always been sport.
Well, I bet he's stick thin then, isn't he?
So he sticks in?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
He's skinny.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, sticks in.
Yes.
Sorry.
What do you think I said?
thought he said sticks in. Yeah, he sticks in. But that's not the point.
No.
He's not eating. My children eat meat late simply just to give their digestive system a chance. So, you know, give them the roughage and things that they need. And that's because it's a condition, isn't it? It's like you give your child meat from a very young age, they decide they want it.
Well,
now that he discusses it, now we can talk about it.
That's good. And but again, you know, in a sense, by having an engaged, interested, informed mum like you, he's already got a march on some of his mates. And the fact that he's elected at the age of 10 to give up meat means that he's arguably more immersed in these matters than almost all of his peers. I don't know, Rachel, whether or not you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. I think you think it's a bad idea, but with some good reasons behind it.
No, I do actually think it's a good idea because I don't want my son caught up in that kind of level of socialisation. So even if it's a case of not eating that, but eating or not eating at all, I still don't want my son. I want my son to come straight home. And if it means you shouldn't be in a chicken shop and he can get a detention, I know personally my son does not like to get into trouble and it would very much deter him.
And so it would work, and it means your son. And again, this is where having a top mum is relevant because he's going to get fed. He's not going to go hungry. He's not going to get home with an empty belly. But your son would benefit from. I mean, it's what we used to think teachers were there for, really, to stop children from acting against their own interests. Given that Britain is currently constructed in a way designed to encourage adults to act against their own interests, Brexit, perhaps it's only inevitable that we've started balking at the idea that children should be prevented from doing so as well. Rachel, what a lovely caller. Thank you for your patience. You can go and eat your sandwich now. It's 12:15. So, I mean, the proposal was, of course, to ban fast food joints from opening up outside schools. The supply and demand argument is, I mean, with the greatest of love and respect to everybody who's made it, it is meaningless here because you supply and demand. If that's the only basis upon which children are fed, then they'd only ever eat sweets. You know, and also, you know, it's not the business for teachers to get involved. Do you want teachers to intervene when kids are caught smoking? Well, that's different. That's against the law. Well, why is it different? It's against the law. Yeah, but why is it against the law? Health. The law, arguably, with processed food and sugar and salt and fats and oils, hasn't caught up with the health in the way that if you'd suggested to someone in the 1940s that cigarettes were going to be banned from many public spaces on health grounds, or that, you know, there'd be age limits on who could and couldn't smoke them, they'd have laughed in your face. They were still being advertised by doctors as recently as the 60s, I think. So, and looking back, I've gone back to the local paper. The allegation is that teachers have gone into the shops and threatened kids in the shops with detentions. The spin is that they're doing so for health reasons. The claim is from the school that it's more about security. So the rule would be, if I've read this correctly, the rule would be when you leave school, you go home. You don't loiter on this particular stretch of pavement or road containing these particular shops, because that way, you know, things could kick off. You've got 400 kids. Johnny might be wanting a fight with Jimmy. Gemma might be wanting a fight with Jenny. You just don't know. So that is the rule. And you see that a lot if you have schools in your area. But if it is actually also an attempt to stop kids eating junk food, when did we become a country that was relaxed about that? Answer, when we started letting people spend huge amounts of money on encouraging us to do really, really unhealthy things while claiming that it was somehow a free market. Chris is in Bournemouth. Chris, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. First time caller.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. I was talking to your producer, and I'm kind of that guy who used to be the really chubby kid at school.
Oh, yes.
The guy who couldn't get round the 1,500 metres track without a PE teacher coming and helping them. And really, the conversation today just made me feel really angry. Off the back of especially hearing, I've been listening all morning and hearing Nick talk about the topic as well, and some of the people calling in to speak to him, because the people who don't feel that childhood obesity is an epidemic that needs solving are the people who don't need help or who don't see the issues. We need to be doing absolutely everything that we can to stop kids from getting overweight. And if that involves encouraging them strongly to not go into fast food places on the way out. I mean, I wasn't so much chicken and chips when I was at school. I was more pop in for a couple of chocolate bars, to be honest. But the point is that food is now so calorie dense.
That's why it's like having conversations about what we did in the 70s is a bit like inviting people who bought a house in the 50s to comment on the current property market. I know that can sound a little bit patronising, but you know, suck it up, snowflakes. You fell through. I mean, I have. How old are you? Do you mind me asking?
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm 32.
32. So okay, because I have this theory that when I was at school, I could tell you the name of the kids you've just described because they were exceptions. Now, in a lot of schools, you would struggle to single people out for being obese or overweight because so many are. I mean, that's a statistical fact. So something really profound has changed. And if you want to change it back, I, like you, I probably didn't get angry because I don't have the personal investment that you have. But if you want to change it back to when you were an exception to the general rule in the classroom, then you have to look at what kids are putting in their mouth and you have to change it. And in almost every other area of life, the kind of people queuing up to say, how dare they stop kids eating fried chicken, would be the same people queuing up to say there's not enough discipline in schools, there's not enough stick, there's too much carrot. It's a funny one, that. I don't quite understand it.
Do you know, I think you're exactly right, and I think the issue is that portion sizes have gotten bigger, calories have gotten cheaper. You can now buy, you know, a chocolate bar with 200 calories in a store for kind of 50p, 70p, and people just don't realise that. You know, you
but I think, when I was sitting here at 1 minute to 10, I didn't hear much of Nick's show. I knew he was talking about it, but I think the last caller we got was that I did this and I did that. I'm 53 and I'm all right, and you just sort of go, oh mate, please, what's that got to do with the price of fried chicken?
exactly. And, people think that, you play a game of rugby, and I think you mentioned someone whose son is rowing
Yes.
and is eating them out of house and home.
Yes.
But in many ways, I tend to think that as a comparison is a little dangerous, because people don't realise quite how much physical activity it takes to burn calories. People don't
That's very
realise
true.
that
Yes.
you run a mile to burn off 100 calories. You can run a couple of miles and still not burn off a couple of Mars bars. So there's this misattribution of kids doing an hour or 2 hours of PE a week, which is, I think, what I had. I think I had 2 hours of PE a week.
Yeah. I was thinking more of my own childhood when we had 2 hours a day, but that's a private school thing, I guess.
But, you can't...
2 hours a
can't
day,
just-
it was very hard not to burn off all the calories you'd consumed. And when you factor in the fact that the meals were mostly rubbish, it's a miracle that any of us ever tipped the scales at more than 6 stone.
I couldn't agree more. And then you give kids the opportunity to eat pizza or sandwiches or chips or, any kind of fast food on the way back, or chocolate or cakes. Well, hey, we're all only human. The dopamine hit that you get from sugar or something that you enjoy in your mouth.
It's a fascinating thing, and I sometimes feel, Chris, that I'm close to some sort of epochal observation that sums up almost every issue that we discuss. But if you want to change people's behaviour, then you usually need legislation. But if that behaviour is delivering massive profits, or just profits to people, then legislation is unlikely to happen. So although we're talking about chili bellies and monikers here in the context of a suburb of Bristol, we're also talking about Coca-Cola and KFC and McDonald's and some of the biggest vested interests on the planet. And the idea that legislation gets introduced that would shrink their profits is... I suppose it's the garlic, isn't it, to the crucifix of free market. It's not a free market if you haven't got a free choice. So that perhaps is where some of the motivation comes from. We're not really discussing junk food. We're talking about whether or not the law should curtail profiteering to protect children. And the lobby that would be protecting the profiteers and sacrificing the children is a lot more powerful than a couple of teachers in high-vis vests.
And I couldn't agree more. And you made the point just before you took my call that this would be seen in exactly the same way, or a completely different way, to cigarette smoking or alcohol consumption. If we said today, we're going to let kids on the way home from school have a beer, we'd all think that was absolutely ludicrous. And yet, however many years after legislation, we look at it and go, actually, that's a really sound, good idea.
Safety belts in cars. How dare they? Interfering nanny state, making me wear a safety belt. I've been driving for 47 years. I've never had an accident.
Exactly. And, veering on to different topics, I was having a conversation the other day about things like drink driving. It used to be acceptable 50 years ago. Now it's morally abhorrent. When do we get to the point where actually feeding your kids or letting your kids eat really calorific, life-shortening, as you put it, food is morally unacceptable? When do we get to that point?
Well, you tell me. And even when we get to the point that it's morally acceptable, making it commercially acceptable would be a whole different basket of chicken. Chris, what a lovely call. Thank you. Chris, if you sort of joined us halfway through that call, what was very overweight at school and recognises that it is not something you can leave to free choice, kids to get healthy. Yeah, any more than you can leave them to do their homework unattended. Yeah, I want you to eat healthily. All right, Dad, I'll eat healthily. And then you don't get involved again. I want you to do your homework. All right, Dad, yeah, I'll do my homework. Perhaps I lived in a different era, or perhaps my experiences are irrelevant to the modern world. But I know some children, and I'm fairly confident that simply asking them once to eat healthily and or do their homework is not the end of the matter. Paul's in Crawley. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, yes. I felt prompted to call. You mentioned that what might have been relevant, for example, in the 50s, 60s and 70s may not necessarily be pertinent today. So I certainly wouldn't want to come on and sort of indulge myself on a trip down memory lane.
We enjoy a trip down memory lane, as long as it's relevant. But
it is. I really believe it is. But I'll touch on that very briefly because, as I say, I don't know waffle. I was at secondary school in London in the early 1970s, and myself and my friends would go out and buy chips. Not only chips, ironically, it was an opposite, causing obesity, sweets. We would buy half a pound of American Hargums, perhaps with our money in our pocket, which was our dinner money, as it was called, given to us by our parents and our carers. And the school got wind of this, and ultimately it was dealt with to an extent with preventative measures rather than what you might call proactive measures that this news report seems to suggest.
I'm glad, I keep telling myself to stay silent more, and I'm glad I did with you, because this is really relevant, even though it is drawing upon the 1970s. But it's relevant because what happened to you in the 1970s is actually what's happening to these kids in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there are parallels. I mean, it's very simplistic to say this.
No, you're right.
Does human nature change? And one thing I just, reminiscing once again, I won't elaborate, but I was thinking about this, and I thought, it was about the food and the chips and the sweets, which are quite Moorish, but it wasn't just that. It was about
being naughty.
I was coming of age, but it was about independence.
Yeah, being not naughty and independent, hanging out, having a place, having a social hub, a community. But the school took a decision to redirect your money from the sweet shop and the chippy into the coffers of the school, because the dinners they were feeding you were...
We were, this may or may not work today, but we were instructed to report the culprits to the headmaster with our lunch money, our dinner money, and he would basically usher us into the queue. Wow. I'm sure that didn't solve the problem.
No, but there it is, Paul. Best laid plans even of mice and men gang after glay. There is Paul driving a coach and horses through my insistence that no experiences in the 1970s would be relevant to this story, because I should have realised that some people in the 1970s might have had experiences that were a very accurate reflection of this story. But there we are. There's nothing new under the sun. I think I need to burnish my snobbish credentials slightly here. So there is a wonderful story about the South Western Railway's unfolding strikes that leads me to a position I'm rather ashamed of, but I'm not going to lie to you. I sincerely hold it, and I shall tell you what that is shortly. First, though, Abby writes, I am one parent who contacted my son's secondary school in East London and reported the bad behaviour of scores of their students, mostly years 7 and 8, in front of a well-known pastry shop every afternoon. A well-known pastry shop, you say, Abby? I wonder where that could be. The school thanked me, announced in assembly that students should stop this, sent letters to all parents warning them what actions the school would take against students, and stressed that teachers were going on buses with the students to police the issue. They implored parents to encourage their sons to go home after school instead of hanging around on the streets. The result was instantaneous. Rowdy congregation at this shop and the bus stop in front of it stopped. Residents and our clients in the pharmacy breathed a sigh of relief. P.S. My son begged me not to let anyone else know that I was the one who reported it all to the school, and I didn't. It was a win-win for all. According to another one of my correspondents there, you're displaying terribly, terribly out-of-touch upper-middle-class sensibilities there, because you've completely overlooked the fact that the children might have been hungry. So I'm happy to set the record straight on that. Children might be eating food because they're hungry. It's an excellent point, well made. Suzanne is in Westcliff-on-Sea. Suzanne, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, as you probably know, I've spoken to you before about this.
Yes.
Very, very important subject to me.
You teach children to cook?
I set up my own from my house 13 years ago.
I remember.
And I think, basically, you've got to get a happy medium between the interfering nanny
A happy medium, not a happy meal.
Not very
Sorry,
good.
It's all right. It's all there. I don't know why I bothered. Seriously.
Exactly. Before the interfering, between the interfering nanny state and large food companies. Okay, so there's a difference between you need to get in between them. So, I think the only way for kids to learn about food is from home, from the beginning, is to have a foodie attitude from birth, basically. In other countries, France, Spain, Italy, there's no obesity. They know about food. They taste food. They treasure food and taste. They don't just. In this country, they go to chicken shops. They wolf down a load of chips or whatever. They don't even taste it. They don't even know they're eating it.
They do. The salt, and they do. Listen, I'm not going to get all holier than thou on this. I enjoy a bucket of chicken as much as anybody does, but as a treat. Yeah. And there's a reason why I enjoy it as a treat. I also enjoy healthy food if I'm in the right mood, and I can look forward to something that's incredibly good for me. But they do taste it. The salt and the sugar and the spices and the special sauce. It's all got flavour.
Totally. It's all got flavour and MSG, so it's addictive. But what I'm trying to say is, from birth, if you explain to the children the difference between good food, healthy food, and dreadful food, there is a difference. I teach kids from age 6. And they're fussy. They know what to eat, what to choose to make the right choices. They know if they're creative in the kitchen.
But a kid who hasn't had this education, a kid who's twice the age of the 6-year-old, a kid who's falling out of school at 3:15 in the afternoon, absolutely ravenous. He's got £2.50 in his pocket, and it's going to be very, very hard to persuade him or educate him into not spending that £2.50 on chicken and chips and spending it instead on a falafel sandwich or something.
But why do they do it? And why have they got this right in other countries? Why is it just this country and America?
Do you know what I think? I have a theory. Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it will be the market, because in France they actually protect things like boulangeries and what have you. But I think it's something to do with rationing. I think you don't sound very enthralled by my little theory here, Suzanne.
I agree.
I'm expecting more enthusiasm.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, well, can we just work on your then first? Do you think?
No, I agree with you. But
I haven't finished yet. How can you agree with me? I haven't even shared half of the theory.
Go on then.
Yeah.
Go on then.
Anyway, here we are. Yeah, everyone sit down.
Yeah.
Your notebooks out. Yeah. You did it again, Suzanne.
I'm just going to pop to the loo while you...
What?
Sorry.
This is outrageous. Have you got a wheel that needs changing? I think that rationing... when we came out of rationing, processed food in this country had a real glamour to it and a real appeal, and we still haven't shaken off that legacy.
It's advertising, absolutely.
Yeah, advertising as well, of course.
Yeah, big companies.
And that's why you are not on a hiding to nothing, but you are David, and the big companies are Goliath, and you ain't got no catapult.
I'm doing my bit.
You are.
I've got a clean conscience, and I'm doing my bit. That's
and that is it. And if we had a Suzanne like you in every school, then we probably wouldn't have this problem, except that you'd have to deal with the kind of abuse that Jamie Oliver invited when he had the audacity to try to help children whose parents were not informed enough to help them themselves. That's all it is. It might sound patronising, but it's also true. It's 20 to 1 already. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. Oh, I don't know if you've seen this. Two things I meant to share with you. They've done a Freedom of Information request on how much the Festival of Brexit has currently cost. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, shut up, James. It can't have cost anything. They haven't done anything yet. To which I've got 2 words. Garden Bridge. You don't actually need anything tangible and visible in order to spend a significant amount of money. What did they spend on the Garden Bridge that never got built? Was it £40 million? Yeah? Yeah, I just can't wait to unleash the country's potential. It's going to be great, isn't it? With that fellow who spent £40 million on a unbuilt bridge, somehow discovering the ability to... But anyway, I digress. The Festival of Brexit. Alberto Nardelli, top lad, I've met him, from BuzzFeed, has submitted a Freedom of Information request. And if he told me he was planning on doing this, I'd have said to him, Alberto, please don't be ridiculous. How could they possibly have spent a bunch of money on something that hasn't happened yet? To which he probably would have replied, 2 words, James, Garden Bridge. So I will share with you shortly how much money has already been spent on the so-called Festival of Brexit, that the government responsible for bringing you the 50p coins at the end of October. The special Brexit 50p coins have also... I'll find out how much and I shall share it with you. And on an altogether more serious note, I want to share with you a clip of the chief executive of Fishmongers Hall. Just because I sometimes labour under the illusion that everybody spends as much time on Twitter as I do. I appreciate that you don't. And while this has been broadcast in the news, it hasn't been broadcast enough. The events of Friday, which of course... Dave Merritt, the father of the murdered 25-year-old Jack, begged politicians not to seek to make political capital from. He has, perhaps predictably, been roundly ignored by some of them, respected by others. But underneath all of that, the human story, the human tragedy, I shared with you a little post from Jack's best friend, Holly, which... I'd read it 3 or 4 times before I did it on air because I knew that it would have an effect upon me emotionally that wouldn't play out well through the microphone. And I got a lot of messages from you saying it had exactly the same effect. I don't think this one will in the same way. I don't think it'll make you cry. I think it will make you marvel at 2 things, one really big, one quite small. The big thing is... the absolute bravery that he describes, the astonishing, unquestioning courage that he details. The second thing for me, I don't know what the background is of Toby Williamson, who's chief executive of Fishmongers Hall, where the rehabilitation conference was being held. My God, he's a storyteller. If Jackanory still existed, they should sign him up in a heartbeat. 12:43 is the time. Do you want to hear it in its entirety? All right, then.
He's the guy who cleans the grasses down in the basement, and that's exactly what he was doing when he hears this scream. The scream is so loud that as a first aider, he makes a choice. He goes towards the trouble. He gets there on the first floor of the building just behind me, and it's pretty clear that there's a bad guy. He's got 2 knives in his hand. There's blood, there's screaming, there's chaos. Lucas pulls off the wall this long stick. He charges towards the bad guy, and he impacts him on the chest. And there's clearly something here that is protective, and it doesn't make any sort of impact. But he's buying time. He allows others to escape, to move to adjacent rooms. At that point, he's got about a 1 minute one-on-one straight combat. This guy we now know by the name of Khan. He works his way up Lucas's poles, slashing with this knife, and he takes 5 wounds to his left side, and he's going to lose some strength on that side. But he's done what he needed to do in the first instance. So 2 other guys who are part of the charity, one's got a fire extinguisher now, and one's got this narwhal tusk ripped off the wall. They come and join the fight, and it's pretty gruesome. I think the terrorist decided he was outnumbered. He runs for it. He goes down the main staircase, and the next bit of hell is at reception. He can't get out the front door, so he turns to reception when our guy called Gareth, who's the doorman, is pushing the door shut as good as he can, so that Dawn, a yard behind, can get on the telephones, hit the alarms, do exactly as her training is told to do. Khan shifts his position to the cloakroom. The girls there, Ala and Sandra, they have a hell of a time, and then eventually it all comes to a great sort of showdown in the entrance hall. Lucas is back in this point, leading the charge. And Andy's the last guy I introduced here. He's our maintenance man. I'll tell you what, 2 things. He's a Ministry of Defence ex-policeman, and he's also a pretty cool customer. But when the knife goes to his chest and, kill or open the door is the choice, he pauses for a moment. He's reluctant to spill all this out onto the pavement when members of the public are going to be facing the same problems, but he makes exactly the right choice. The door's opened, the terrorist falls, and the first one after him is Lucas, shouting at everyone to get out of the way, get back. But I tell you what, members of the public, they just don't do that nowadays. They do what they needed to do. They join in. The man with the fire extinguisher, the man with the narwhal tusk, they're all in there. Lucas is losing strength on his left side at this point, but I tell you what, his job is done. The police are here, and I think you've seen the rest already on camera.
12:46 is the time. Astonishing stuff. And Lucas himself has issued a statement. It's incredibly powerful in its simplicity, but it ends with this, which I think, and indeed I hope, is respected rather more than some politicians have managed to respect the wishes of Jack Merritt's dad, Dave. When the attack happened, I acted instinctively. I am now coming to terms with the whole traumatic incident and would like the space to do this in privacy with the support of my family. Hands up if you've ever heard of Dibsy. Have you heard of the Save Dibsy campaign? This is really interesting in the context of what we're discussing. I just want to double-check some of the details, because I'm reading it from the Sun newspaper. But there's a gym boss who sort of has special projects. He undertakes one special project at a time while also running his gym and doing the normal personal training. And the story that reached the news involved a lad called Dibsy. I don't know what his full name is, because I've got boring computer reasons, but I'm sure I can find out. He was warned by his doctor that he was going to die. I mean, he was absolutely immense. Here we go. Darren McClintock. His nickname's Dibsy. Darren Dibsy McClintock. This is from September of this year. And it reached the newspapers because he was one of the 57,000 people competing in the Great North Run. But just a year prior to that, he was so fat he couldn't even walk upstairs to bed. So he met this gym owner, Mike, and Mike embarked upon a sort of special regime wherein I understand he takes full responsibility. It's like a project. Dibsy was going to die until he met Mike, the gym owner. And Mike then printed up posters and pictures and went into all of the local takeaways explaining that if they carried on serving him, he would die. Save Dibsy was the campaign. And it worked. 12 months, he shed, I mean, stunning amounts of weight. I'm looking at the pictures now, and ran the Great North Run. He looks great, actually. He looks really, really good. And the big change, of course, was in the food he was eating. The gym owner actually went directly to the takeaways. So if you had a 40-stone kid standing outside a chicken shop and a teacher saying to the kid, "You can't go in, I'll give you a detention," right? You probably wouldn't object. Am I right? The reason why we object to this is that somewhere I think it plays to the notion that other people are going to tell us what to do. How dare that king be... But that is a really unhealthy impulse, not just for the obvious reasons, but also for the historical ones. You know, the people that told you had to wear a safety belt in your car, the people that told you weren't allowed to smoke in the pub, the people that told you weren't allowed to drink alcohol until you were 18 or 16 with a meal when I was a kid. The people that all of these things could have been filed under nanny state, you know? All of them. And yet they prolong our lives and make us healthier and make us happier. But because people are making money out of them, and because those people can funnel money to shady organisations that refuse to disclose their funding but release, quotes, research into things like sugar and junk food and tobacco, then it continues. And this narrative grows up that nanny state equals bad, whereas actually... you don't have to be Jacob Rees-Mogg to recognise that nannies can actually be a force for good. They look after you. I don't need a nanny. No, you carry on then. You carry on eating 20 Marlborough for breakfast every day. You'll be absolutely fine. And then, I don't hear this very often anymore, but you used to hear it a lot in this job. My Auntie Doris smoked 80 Woodbine a day and had 6 pints of Guinness before breakfast, and she lived to be 112, so I don't believe the science. You get that now in planetary science. You get that now with climate change. It's quite warm today. Or no, it's cold today. So much for global warming. Yeah, I can remember Sun columnists actually writing that in the country's best-selling newspaper. Oh, if global warming is a thing, why is it snowing? It's just incredible. It's a performative ignorance by people who don't realise how ignorant they are. And now, of course, the new battleground is food, I think. So, what's wrong with stopping kids from going into junk food joints for half an hour after leaving school? Whether it is for their health or whether it is for security reasons or whether actually, as I have concluded in my wisdom, it's a bit of both. 03456060973. Shall we go to Graham, who is not far from Dibsy, up in Newcastle? Graham, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
I'm all good, mate.
Yeah, I've never heard that Dibsy story, mate.
That's what I'm here for, Graham. Raking over the carcass of the news to bring you the tasty morsels that you missed.
Brilliant. Thanks for doing that, James. You're doing a good service for the British public, albeit from I think you're coming on from the wrong angle.
It wouldn't be the first time. Tell me why.
Well, I think there's a general sort of theme with people like yourself who are in the sort of the mass media of massively oversimplifying a problem.
Yeah, well, I'm almost certainly guilty of that. Before you tell me how, is there anything you can do to improve your phone line? It's very, very echoey. I don't know if you've put me on speaker.
Just bear with 2 seconds.
Yeah, there we go.
Is that any better?
Not really, but carry on.
Right. I'll sort out my new headset. I've got it. Yeah, so I think we're just looking at the tail end of it. We're not looking at the root cause of it. We're not getting back to what I call first principles.
Go on.
And all we're doing is we're looking at the actual problem, which is children going and buying junk food. And by the way, I don't agree with teachers stopping them having the choice. The question you've got to ask is, why are they making that choice in the first place?
Yes.
Why are the children hungry at that time of day? Now, I used to be a chairman of an academy trust, and we had, up in County Durham, we had 2 years of free school meals, and the statistics showed a massive jump in the ability of school children to both concentrate and they didn't need any junk food, as in They didn't have a propensity to eat junk food.
Yeah.
So I think it's an issue with school meals.
Do you know, oddly, I don't know if you've seen the news, but I think John McDonnell has announced today that they will bring back free school meals for every primary school in the country.
I totally agree. It was such a massive jump. It was a massive, noticeable jump. But it's just pure common sense to give it to all children, all school children of any school children's age. And they're making better choices. You can educate them on what they're eating, where it comes from. This is the carrot. This is how the farmer grows it. This is how it's harvested.
Yeah.
And there's a whole narrative and journey about how food's created to how it gets on their plate. And it's all about education. And that's the problem. People go, the kids go into the junk food shops. Let's stop them. Well, let's find out, do some proper root cause analysis.
I would rather believe you than pretty much anybody else who's rung in, but we do have to recall, and I said myself at the time, see it as a teething trouble rather than as evidence for the prosecution of the whole project. But the kids at the schools where Jamie Oliver launched his school meals campaign were getting all of the things you described. That was the whole point, and yet still they were encouraging their mams to come and force sausage rolls through the chain-link fence at the bottom of the playing field.
Yeah, but I think if Jamie Oliver came to school in the North East and imposed something on them, I think even just the fact he's Jamie Oliver, they would probably just protest against that fact and it's been imposed on them. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it.
Yeah, although for my money he did I don't know, it's chicken and egg. Tabloid demonisation leads to tabloid readers thinking people are demons. But
it's got to start with the school.
You've seen it work. You've seen it work, so I'm not going to argue.
I've seen it from the inside, how well it works. I've seen the figures. And the difference in boys' education, because boys are really difficult because all they want to do is jump about. And we shouldn't be giving them this ADHD.
And decent, healthy meals. Do all the things you've described, improve the quality of study, but also, I am Incorrigible, who's been very helpful throughout this.
She's 100% correct.
Yeah.
100% correct.
That's it, isn't it?
She's the only sensible person I've heard on this phone.
Yeah, all right, mate. Wind your neck in. I don't do this for the love of it, you know. It's literally stifling the supply of hungry kids for fast food outlets. In simplest terms, it literally dries up the supply, as you say, because they won't be hungry in the way that they currently
Nobody's looking at the root cause. They're only looking
I don't know. We'll have to check this Labour Party policy about free school meals, won't we, for every primary school in the country, and that would be under your analysis, good news on a whole heap of levels, some of which they might not even appreciate themselves. I will, of course, be happy to balance out that suggestion when the Conservatives reveal what their policy is for school meals. It's coming up to 12:59. Graham, thank you, mate. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. But in the context of the conversation we were having, to defend all the other contributors that you just affectionately maligned, that is changing the world. This is talking about something happening in the world, and the world that we currently inhabit doesn't do the things you describe, so the question about whether or not teachers should be doing the things we describe is still pertinent. Yeah, it's about as close as I come to warmly accepting criticism. It's coming up to 12:59. Speak to Sadiq tomorrow on the programme. If you've got a question for the Mayor of London, get in early. And actually, I was about to say I'll put it to him for you, but I don't have to. You can do it yourself. It's a phone-in show, you know, although obviously there are some days when you could be forgiven for not having realised that, thanks to the length of my contributions.